We need to think about the fact that we will die one day because it will help us to actually live our life fully. It changed my life. I'm not the only person that has said it. I've talked to so many people that have said the thing that got me to fully and truly live my life was being okay with the fact that I'm going to die. And so there's people that they say meditate on it every day, think about it every day. I mean, this is what Stoics have said. This is what a lot of religions have said. If we think about it briefly every day, we will live our lives better so that when we do get to that moment of death, whenever that is, we'll be able to look back and say, I lived my life as fully as I could.
Hello, welcome to another episode on Your Health is Your Greatest Wealth, and I have the pleasure of introducing my guest, Jill McClennen. Jill is a death doula and an end-of-life coach. She also has a podcast and YouTube channel called Seeing Death Clearly. And with that, Jill, take it away. Tell us about you and what you do.
Well, thank you so much for having me on today. So I am a death doula. I started saying end-of-life coach, I think because people understand what a life coach is. And so as I was trying to explain what I do with people around the end of life, they were like, oh, it kind of sounds like a life coach. And I was like, well, sure, I'm going to go with end-of-life coach. So it's really just helping people in a time period of life around a topic that most of us have avoided. We don't want to think about our own death. We don't want to think about our loved one's death. We don't want to talk about it, but we're all going to have to face it at some point. And so if we can start thinking about it, if we can start preparing ourselves for it, it not only helps us when that time comes, but I have found that I actually live my life better once I was really okay with the fact that my life is going to end at some point. I just live differently now. And that was kind of like a surprise side benefit that I was not expecting. But it's really, I think it's work that it's needed. And I love being with people in a space that is vulnerable, that is intimate, and that really allows us to connect in a way that I don't connect with people on a regular day-to-day basis. So that's kind of a little bit about what I do.
So much of what you said is so powerful, including mortality awareness. I think so many of us that have been faced with that do view life through a different lens. And for me personally, it is such a stark contrast of how I grew up and how I was raised. I'm Mexican, and death is never discussed in the Latino culture. It is such a taboo topic with mainstream America as well, but I know certain cultures that really never talk about death, and it's somehow feared that is as if talking about it, it's something you're going to catch. So I so appreciate you being here today and talking about this really difficult topic. I too have difficulty talking about it. And that is what made me aware that this is why we need to just really start having the conversations. And you bring such an interesting perspective with all the work you do. So take us in for deep dives. What have you learned that you can impart the rest of us with that are not as advanced with our thoughts about death and dying and grief?
I mean, like, there's 1,000 things that we can talk about when it comes to death, dying, grief, why we don't talk about it, why we're afraid of it, all of those things. But usually the first place that I'll start with somebody, if they say, I'm afraid of death and I don't ever talk about it, I completely avoid it. And then I'll say, well, what is it that you're afraid of? Are you afraid of the moment of death? Are you afraid of what comes after death because you don't know? Is there heaven? Is there hell? Do we get reincarnated? Like, does that part scare you? Or is it more that what will lead up to death? Is that what scares you? Because if we could get clear first on what's the part that we're most afraid of, then at least that gives us somewhere to start. Because really, I would say most people, they're more afraid of what will lead to death. They're not afraid of death itself. They're not even afraid of what comes afterwards. I find most people either believe I'm going to go to heaven or I'm going to get reincarnated or nothing's going to happen. I'm going to go out like a light bulb. Nothing's going to happen. But everybody, for the most part, has a belief about what's going to happen to them. And they're kind of okay with it. They're like, yeah, sure. This is what I believe. I'm fine with it. If I go out like a light bulb, I'm fine. If I go to heaven, like I'm fine. But most people are afraid of what is going to happen to them before they die. They'll have the stories of, I watched my mom, I watched my sibling, God forbid, I watched my child, right? I watched somebody go through a lot of suffering before they died. Well, then that's not death itself that we're actually afraid of. We're afraid of the suffering that leads to death. And if that's what we're most afraid of, the best thing we could do is talk about it. The best thing we could do is educate ourselves. The best thing we could do is talk to our loved ones and our doctors and the people around us that are going to have to make these decisions so that we can prevent a lot of that suffering, because a lot of the suffering actually is preventable if we get clear on what's important to us. And one of my personal examples, my grandmother was 94 when she died. I took care of her for the last 4 years of her life. She was 90. She just had her 90th birthday. Her birthday is actually tomorrow, September 10th. So she had just turned 90. Week or two later, we found out she had a lump in her chest. Turns out it was cancer. Now, why we gave a 90-year-old woman surgeries and radiations and all of these treatments that caused her a lot of suffering. She didn't actually die from the cancer. She died from an infection from the radiation because it destroyed her skin so much. Now, if I would have known then what I know now, I would have really asked the doctors, so what if we just give her surgery? What if we just remove what we can remove? What happens then? Okay, maybe she would have had 3 or 4 years. Okay, well, that's all she had anyway. But she would have potentially had a much better quality of life. Now, again, if it's me at 45, two little kids, of course, I'll do the radiation, I'll do the chemo, I'll do the more aggressive treatments if they think it's going to help me, like, quote unquote, beat the cancer. If it's going to help give me, my life back. If they say, well, it might just slow it down, but you're still going to die from it. Honestly, I don't know what my choice would be, but I know that I might think about it differently and say, if I'm only going to have 2 or 3 years anyway, maybe I'll only have two, but I'll be mostly able to do whatever I still want to do. So I could experience it with my children, not be bedbound because I'm so sick from radiation and chemo and I can't travel and I can't go to their soccer games and I can't do the things that I love to do. But we don't know to make these decisions, or we don't know to ask the questions in order to make the right decision for us, because the way that we've all really grown up, the way that the medical system works is we fight, we fight, we fight, we treat, we treat, we treat, and then it doesn't always get us the results that we want. And so there are things that we can do to prevent it from being this long extended period of suffering, because that's the thing too. Because of medical advancements, if I was 45 and I found out I had cancer 100 years ago, I mean, first off, they probably wouldn't even known it was cancer. They would have just been like, I don't know, she's sick, she's dying from something, we don't know what. I would have died fairly quickly. Where now it can be drawn out over years and years and years, which, okay, again, maybe it gives me extra years with my children, but if it's not the quality of life that I want, do I want that extra quantity? I don't know. And so that's really a big part of where I start these conversations with people, is like, we just need to get clear so we can make the best decisions for us and what it is that's important to us, without just making a decision because that's what somebody's telling us to do. Because that's one of the things too. After talking with people that are dying at all ages, right? This could be somebody that's younger, this could be somebody that's in their 90s. They'll say, I really didn't live my life. I have so much regrets about, doing what everybody else thought I should do, working really hard to make all this money because that's what I was told I should do. But I wasn't going to the back to school nights, and I wasn't going to my kids' games, and I wasn't doing the things that were important to me. I didn't live my life. And I try to get people of, again, all ages, any stage of life, especially, I would say, and again, none of us know for sure if we're healthy, right? There's could be things going on, but those of us that are living our life out and we're just kind of in autopilot and we're just going through the motions. I'm like, let's stop just going through the motions. Let's really put some intention behind what we're doing and why we're doing it, because one day this is going to end. And do I want to look back and think I missed all of these things with my children? I missed all of this time with my husband because I was so busy going to meetings and doing all these things that I didn't really have to do, but I felt like I had to do it. So those are like the really big things for me when I talk to people is let's get clear on what we're afraid of. And then also, once we get clear, let's live our life because it's not going to be forever. No matter what, none of us is going to live forever.
Yeah. So, Jill, you said something that I know is, I think, becoming more of a conversation these days as people analyze how they live their life, and it's the concept of regret. I think so many of us that do exist in that consciousness space of, we want to live a very full life because we do have this mortality awareness. Yet, I know just hearing from you that, and listening to several of your episodes as well, you have a phenomenal podcast. I'm so glad I became aware of it. Again, for the audience, Seeing Death Clearly. So this whole concept of regret and what people see at their end of life and making peace, do you find that when people did not make that peace, that is when they die with the regret, and it's not really the fear of dying, but that they did not make peace with a lot of the things that happened throughout their life, and that's really the part that they wish they could work on, the making peace part?
Yes, a lot of people do have, regrets about what they didn't do, the conversations they didn't have. Again, looking back on their life and thinking, I didn't spend time doing the things that were important. And then when they're dying, we don't have the opportunity to go back and do things over again. The only thing that we can really do, and I say we as in the person that is navigating the illness and the death, and me as, the death doula, or again, like end of life coach, the only thing that we can really do is to work through some of the regrets, some of the shame, some of the things that are really, I think in a lot of ways, it keeps people tied to this realm. It keeps people tied to this life, that sometimes people have a really hard time dying. They have a hard time letting go because they're so just stuck in this grief and this regret and all these things that they wish they would have done. And so we can't go back and change it. We can't go back and fix it, but we can, work through it. We can find forgiveness within ourselves, even for things that we've done to other people. Because that's, again, one of the things that I love so much about this work is that I think it's partially my personality anyway. Like I'm kind of like an open person where there's almost nothing somebody could tell me that they've done that will make me change the way that I'm interacting with them. I mean, I've had people say to me, like, I've shot and killed people. And I'm like, okay, like, let's do this. Let's work through that. Like there's no judgment on my part. Everybody has had a different life. They've had a different story. It is what it is. I'm there to help them die. But it's fascinating, a lot of the things that people will tell me, all the way up to like, I've killed people, all the way down to like, I didn't have the relationship with my children, or I didn't have the closure with my mother when my mother died, and I still feel really bad about it. So like we can work through that and help people get the closure that they need. But again, let's just do it now. Like, let's do it now while we have the opportunity to then get that closure, to live out the rest of our lives feeling that if that moment were to come, because that's it too. The people that I talk to, they know they're dying, right? Most of the cases, they've been sick, they know that they're dying. But a lot of us, we're not going to have even that opportunity. We're going to die suddenly. People have heart attacks, people have accidents. Like, we're not even going to have that opportunity within ourselves to think through and get that closure. So we should do it now while we can. That's always my thing. Like, let's all do this now.
Yeah, Jill, and I actually was fortunate enough to listen to your interview that you did with someone that was talking about veterans and a lot of the regrets they have. And, I just wanted to provide a juxtaposition because I thought it was such an interesting perspective. And I wanted to point it out for the audience. Right now, when you said, I have people tell me that they killed and shot people, I think most people's mind would naturally go to they committed a crime. My mind went to, because I had just listened to your episode, it's like that is the moral conflict that that veteran, that war soldier is dealing with. It was not a choice, it was part of what they were told to do. And I just bring this up too because right now we are unfortunately having wars in different countries. And just that whole higher level conversation of the moral conflicts, someone take with them that if they don't resolve them, they get on the deathbed, they do take that to their grave. And I just thought, for me, it was like a wow or a whoa moment that it made me realize I would have never thought about that. That some of the guilt people feel is not necessarily even for something they intentionally caused, but things that still happen in their life. And I just think that's such a big conversation. I don't know exactly where I wanted to go with that, but when you said that, that was just the thought that snapped into my head with regards to regret. You know, it's not always conscious things that you chose to do, maybe the things you didn't do as well on another topic, but that regret and shame and forgiveness are so huge. And with that, I wanted to segue because this is a question for me. I'm going to get a little vulnerable here. I think there are two different camps, if you will, on fear about dying. And one is about my own fear of me dying and the fear of my loved ones dying. And for me, I fear my loved ones dying more than I fear myself dying. And is that something you encounter with the work you do?
Yeah, I mean, for me, that's my biggest fear as well. I am not as worried about me dying, other than I don't want to leave children behind. Like that's, I think, the thing. It's not the death itself that I'm afraid of. Even if there is some suffering leading up to it. I mean, I am Buddhist. Like I actually did take my vows to become a Buddhist. I know that suffering is part of this existence. I don't want to suffer, but suffering is part of life. So I'm not even really afraid of that. But I don't want to leave behind children, and I don't want my husband to die and leave me with two little kids. I don't want my husband to die and leave me alone for, in my head, like we joke about it. We've known each other since we were about 20, right? And we joke about the fact that we're going to be in our 90s when we die, and hopefully we'll die holding hands. And like, it's a joke, but ideally, like, yes, that would be amazing. Is it going to happen? Probably not. Reality is that's probably not the case. I don't want him to die and leave me alone at 45. Like, that does bother me, that thought. One of my children dying, that's like the worst thing I could ever imagine happening. But it happens to people every day, right? People's husbands don't come home every day. People's children don't come home every day. Thinking about it is not going to make it happen to me. But what it has done is I am very intentional now that when my husband leaves the house, especially if he's going away on a work trip, if he's going to get on an airplane and go somewhere far away, every time I drop my children off anywhere at school, whatever else, I always say to them, I love you so much. I hope you have a wonderful day. I can't wait to see you. It's something that I don't ever want to think to myself, I was in a rush, I was frustrated, I maybe kind of like kicked him out the car and was like, I gotta go, because I've done that in the past. Before it was before the like world shut down a little bit, and I was one of those people, like a lot of us. I had two jobs, I had two kids, I was running constantly, trying to get them out the door for school. There was days when it was like barely pulled the car over. It was like open the door, kick them out, and like drive away because I had to be somewhere. And I don't want to live like that anymore. And I don't want to ever think to myself that one of them doesn't come home and the last thing that I said to them was that I didn't say anything, or that I was short-tempered with them, or that I just wasn't showing them that love. And my son's 13. And so, 13-year-old kids, it's like, I know, like he grumbles, he groans, he doesn't respond half the time, but I don't care because I know that he still hears it. And I know that he loves me. He doesn't have to say it back to me, but I want to make sure that I make that effort, that conscious effort in case somebody doesn't come home. Because, yeah, that's worse to me than anything happening to me. And I think that's common with a lot of people. We love our people so much that we can think of our own suffering, but the thought of them suffering is just unbearable. And that again is just, we have to work through that feeling, because we can't stop suffering altogether. It is part of the human existence. As much as I don't want it to be, it is.
So, Jill, I actually had to hold my breath a little twice when you spoke. So I'm sorry. Um,
No, it's okay.
this week marks the 8-year commemoration of me losing my stepson Ryan, and he was 13. So when you started talking, sorry, when you started talking about your 13-year-old, it just took me back to that moment. And honestly, I think it was serendipity when I scheduled this interview with you, because there's part of me that just blanked out that, it was an 8-year commemoration. And I don't like using the word anniversary. I don't know why that bothers me. It's such a trigger word for me. We lost Ryan to a substance. There was some speculation. His friend died 2 days before of the same substance, and then the speculation
Oh my gosh.
became that there was a suicide pact. To this day, we will never know. They are both gone, and this topic is very difficult for me. And I just feel so blessed that our paths crossed, because I think I have avoided this topic myself. It's a very, very deep-rooted, painful experience, and I think that's why so many of us don't talk about it, because it's painful, and we feel that if we avoid the topic, it's a way of not having to deal with emotions. However, I don't necessarily agree with that. Those emotions are always with you. And I've done deep dives into books like van der Kolk's The Body Keeps the Score. And where I'm going with this is that book is based on trauma. And I know, learning about your background, that you are a trauma-informed yoga therapist. And I just want to maybe segue the conversation a little bit about the trauma we experience when we do lose loved ones. Obviously, none of us are prepared, but when you lose someone so tragically, like, to suicide or to an accident, you didn't have the benefit of time where someone was sickly, and you did get to make peace with that because you followed them on their journey to end of life. But that sudden death that you were just not prepared to, and I know for me, you would never expect to outlive your children, your stepchildren. And so for me, this is you being here today is such a pivotal moment, and I did not realize it when we booked this interview. So thank you, and I honor you. And again, my question is, talk to me about the trauma of losing a loved
Yeah.
one.
Yeah, and I am so sorry to hear about your stepson. And, and even for me hearing it, there's that part of me that's like, my gosh, that could be my child. And it could be my child. Again, it could be. And I don't want to take that for granted that it's not at this moment, because there's so many women like you that woke up one day thinking it was going to be a normal day, and then it wasn't. And so I'm so sorry. And I see you and I hear you,
Thank
and
you.
it makes me want to cry as well, because
Uh,
we're all in this together, right? All of us, especially women, especially the women that we hold up the families, even if they're not our own, right? Like, how many families in my community, right? I'm mothers to all these children. Like, we're all in this together. So I am very sorry. And
Thank you.
you are right about, especially with grief, like, we'll kind of talk about the trauma too of the death. But one of the things that I like to encourage people to do is we will hold the grief. Like you mentioned, the book where, we hold this in our bodies, trauma, but grief is a major trauma for a lot of us. And if we don't express it, it will cause illnesses in our body. We need to move that energy out. And it's not easy to
Mm-hmm.
feel what we need to feel. And that's why movement, things like yoga, but it doesn't even have to be yoga. It could be walking, it could be any kind of exercise, it could be dancing, it could be doing anything that moves your body to help
Mm-hmm.
just that energy flow through, because the grief will stay there. And so many of us have unprocessed grief going back to childhood, especially, again, I feel like women, we have the unprocessed grief of our mothers and their mothers that carries through us as well. And we need to be able to feel that and move it and express it in order for us to feel the best that we can feel, to show up and do the work that we need to do with our families, with our clients, with all of our loved ones. And death can be very traumatic for people. In that case, like, especially it's a child, it's, there's still a lot of questions, like there's grief that, or I'm sorry, there's trauma that comes just with the situation itself. But for most of us, if it's a natural death, right? If it's somebody, especially, not that I want to say it's not traumatic when a parent dies, because it is, of course. But again, there's that natural order of things. Our parents are supposed to die before us because they're the parents, right? Children are not supposed to die before their parents. But a lot of what leads to us being traumatized is the fact that we're not prepared for the realities of what death is going to be, because we've avoided talking about it, because we've avoided thinking about it, because the only time we ever see death is when it's on TV or in a movie, and it doesn't look like that in real life. And so when we see the realities of it, it's so overwhelming to our whole system. And because we're often not prepared for what needs to get done, whether it's, things like wills and talking to doctors and planning funerals and like all of those things, we should be feeling our grief. We should be feeling our sadness. We should be feeling, not all grief is sad, right? There's a whole lot of emotions that come up with grief, but we should be able to be feeling what we're feeling and going through our experiences. But often we're just so caught up in having to do all of this stuff that really could be done ahead of time by most of us, right? We can plan a lot of these things ahead of time. We could get all of these things in order so that our families can focus on what they need to focus on. And I think too, when people are really traumatized by a death, it goes back to that regrets of, my parents dying, or my, siblings dying, or my spouse is dying. And I still am holding a grudge, or they're still holding a grudge against me, or we haven't, gotten, there's like the loose ends. There's all these things that we want to be able to get closure on, that we want to be able to say, that we want to be able to do. And now we don't have that time. Now we don't have that opportunity. Plus, we're emotional because we know that we're losing our person. And so it all just builds up to this really traumatic experience for people, that if we could kind of get clear on a lot of these things ahead of time, it doesn't have to be so traumatic. And again, in some cases, if it's an accident, I mean, there's only so much we can plan for. But that's why, again, we have the conversations, we get our wills in place, we get our advanced health directives in place. So if my husband were to be in an accident, it's still going to be traumatic, but at least I have some things lined up and in place, so I don't have to make all these decisions in the middle of being in like crisis mode. But it's tough. It really is. And especially in a case like that with a child, I don't think you could ever be prepared for that.
No, I think what I've learned on my journey, and it is a journey because it's constantly moving towards being healed and trying to feel more whole, which I don't know if you ever really do it. I'm still on the journey, but I think one thing I right now in today's interview, what I can say is I don't know that you ever really reach closure. If there is, I have not found that space yet. And again, I'm still on the journey, but I think some deaths, some losses, there never really is that closure. There never is that peace, or actually I should rephrase it. I think there isn't peace. So in absence of that peace, you sometimes have to be the one to give yourself closure, because it's not going to be provided by anything external. Like no answer will provide that. No other individual will provide that. As part of my own journey, I just had to learn to find closure myself of over the loss. And again, to me, I don't necessarily equate that with peace. Am I at peace with him dying? No, I don't know that I ever will be. And I think those are really big concepts. I would like to see if maybe I look at this interview a year from now and see if I feel differently. Right now I'm in this moment of my journey, where
Mhm.
my journey leads me. I may be a different person then, but what I can and say is, closure and peace. I think they're big concepts for those of us that lose loved ones in a way where it was so unexpected. And again, whether it's a car accident and even more so suicides, it is such a stigmatized way to lose a loved one. And it's now become my personal mission, goal, calling, if you will, that so many individuals don't understand the suicide bereaved. It is a different way to lose a loved one, that I don't know that the grief and the thoughts and the journey ever really is laid out like anybody else's, because the thoughts that go through our heads, the emotions we process are so multi-leveled. I actually recently decided to write a book for the suicide bereaved, and that is the journey I'm on right now. And it's my own healing journey, and I hope in the process it heals other, because I know it's been a very lonely, dark path to walk. And that is what I love about what you're doing, the whole coaching aspect of end of life, and helping us to see life in a different way, that you know what, you have to appreciate life while you have it. And if you took care of that part, then maybe you won't be so scared of that part. And I just think that's such a unique perspective, that had I not lost Ryan, had my family not lost Ryan, I don't know that I would have had that mortality awareness myself.
Yeah, and you're very right that death by suicide, my friend and my boss died by suicide a couple years ago, and the shame, the way that people view somebody dying by suicide, the way that it was, treated, and that like we needed to hide it, like it was like a
Mm-hmm.
dirty secret. There was so much tied up in this death that unfortunately that just adds to the layer of, and then there was, the conversations that him and I had. Why didn't I see it? And again, me, like, why didn't I see it? Why didn't I know? Why didn't I do something? Like all those things that I had to process and that I had to go through in my healing journey. And you're right that I don't think anybody ever gets to a place of necessarily peace with somebody's death, but I think what we find eventually is this idea that we all will die at some point, that death is just part of the cycle in a human life, and we don't have control in most cases over when that happens. And if we live long enough, we're all going to lose somebody that we really, really love. And it's going to feel like it wasn't a good time. It was going to feel like it was too early. It's going to feel like all these things are wrong with it. I've talked to so many people that have different beliefs about life and death and afterlife and all those things. And, you know, some people, it's like, no, our moment of death is chosen from the moment we were born. When we were born, our death date was already decided. And I don't know what I believe, like
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. And actually, I was just editing an episode of my podcast today that was the woman's belief. She was like,
Mm-hmm.
she was a nurse. And she said, I've seen people that have had accidents that they should have never survived. And they walked out of the hospital 3 weeks later. I've seen people that have tripped and fallen and hit their head, didn't seem like it was that big of a deal, and then they died. So what else could it be if it wasn't that our moment of death was already decided? And I'm like, I don't know. There's the people that believe in past lives, that when we come into this life, that we choose the lessons that we're going to learn. And that would be when we would choose our death date, we would choose kind of how we're going to die. We would choose all of these things. I don't know. I don't know how that makes me feel, that thought. It feels kind of crappy sometimes, where I'm like, why would you choose that in your life, to go through that experience of losing a stepson at 13? Why would he have chosen that if that was his choice? Like, but I don't know for sure, right? I don't know. And some
Yeah,
people that brings them peace.
I don't know if you were asking rhetorically or if it was a real question. I don't know that I have the answers. What I have come to realize is that if I don't do something with that pain and I don't take the lessons, the learnings, and share those with others, then to me, that was more of a squandered opportunity and loss that definitely doesn't honor Ryan. And I think for me, when I started asking myself those higher level questions, it's like, why do you want to write the book? And for me, it really came down to because so much of everything that happened surrounding Ryan's death is so misunderstood by so many individuals. If I can help lessen the stigmatization of the suicide bereaved, those of us that have lost loved ones that way, then, to me, that is the sister companion to all the advances that have been made with suicide awareness and destigmatizing mental health. I see advances in that sector. The gap I found when I was just trying to understand what happened with Ryan was that there was no place for me to go to support. It was not the prevention of something. The loss had already happened. And for me, like even doubly, I'm the stepmother. So being in that role of not being a biological parent, like took on so many different layers. And thank goodness, Robert, Ryan's father, such a good man. I mean, we had each other to go through this journey. That to me was just such a realization that it is such a lonely and painful experience. And if there is somebody else that can help you through that, in this case, it was my husband Robert and I. That I think was the one thing that has made a difference in my grief process, having Robert and sharing that grief. And I realize not every couple does that. Sometimes the death of a child actually rips couples apart. We were very blessed that that was not our case. But again, there's just so many layers and components. And so again, I just feel like now I'm being called to be the messenger to help the suicide bereaved. I didn't choose it. It chose me, and it's a calling that I feel I have to honor at this point. So thank you
Yeah.
for being here. You are part of my journey.
Yeah.
So
And it's funny too, because you pointed out that, we didn't realize that it was the date when we scheduled this. And this actually isn't even the date that we scheduled originally. You were like, hey, can you do it earlier? Because I had somebody not be able to come in. And so that makes me feel even more that there is a reason that this happened today, right? That there is a reason that they couldn't come today and that we had just connected and I was able to find the time so that we could be here together, you and I, to help you kind of work through some of this to kind of get you going a little further down your journey. Because you're right that there are people that are going to need your book. There are people that are going to need to hear your story, because again, it happens to somebody every day. You're not the first person that I've talked to that's had a teenager that died. I spoke with a woman that, the son had found a fentanyl pill when they were cleaning out the older siblings, house, and the kid took the pill, not for whatever reason. It was 11, and like, so she lost 2 children within like 2 months.
oh my
It was
goodness.
right. It was terrible. It's
Yeah.
terrible. And now she's out advocating for fentanyl awareness and she's out doing all of this work. She didn't choose to lose 2 children to it. But what she did choose to do was to say, you know what, my pain and suffering can help other people not feel so alone. It can prevent somebody else's death. Like there are gifts, there are those silver linings to our experiences. And so many people I've talked to in their grief journey have said to me, I feel alone. I don't feel that anybody is there that understands what I'm going through. There's not the support groups for the stepmoms of a child that died. There's not that community that we need when we're going through our grief process. But that's why I think one of the benefits, right? There's a few benefits to the social world that we have now, is that we can find each other on Facebook, right? Where like we would have never found each other but we found each other on Facebook. We connected with each other in this space that allows us to come together and not be so alone. You're always going to be alone, right? We're always going to go through our own process alone, but we also don't have to do it alone every step of the way. There are people that can walk with us for part of it, for all of it, sometimes in and out. And it's that I think if you put this book out into the world, there will be people that they don't know right now that they're going to need it. And again, it might be me one day, as much as I hate to say it, as much as I hate to think it, right? Like there's people out there that don't know they need this book yet, but they're going to need it. So I think it's beautiful that you're going to take your pain and your process to help other people going through the same thing.
Thank you, Jill. I honor your journey as well. I think it took our experiences to start these very, very difficult conversations that truly none of us want to have. And I think what I have most learned from this journey is if there had been community, it would not be such a lonely experience of aloneness as well. So that is what that's the change I would like to see. I would like to see a more understanding community when those of us who are bereaving, and again, this doesn't even just apply to those of us who lose loved ones to stigmatized ways like a drug overdose or suicide, whether intentional or accidental. I think the whole concept of bereavement and death is so difficult. But again, creating these safe spaces for people to just really share what the experience is, to not feel so alone, and not in a sense where it always has to be therapy, because I did that too. And at a certain point, I was like, okay, can I just please be done with like therapy? Like, I think I need something bigger and greater than myself, because if I always stay here, then I will have stayed shrunk. And I did not want to keep feeling like I kept shrinking myself because I was so engulfed in this loss that it's the only thing that I had in my life. I wanted to start dreaming again. I wanted to just have goals again. And that is, people don't realize when you lose a child, all of that goes. Jill, so what one parting word or nuggets of wisdom would you like to share with the audience?
Yeah, I would say my soapbox, right, that I always get on is that we need to think about the fact that we will die one day because it will help us to actually live our life fully. It changed my life. I'm not the only person that has said it. I've talked to so many people that have said the thing that got me to fully and truly live my life was being okay with the fact that I'm going to die. And so there's people that they say, meditate on it every day. Think about it every day. I mean, this is what Stoics have said. This is what a lot of religions have said. If we think about it briefly every day, we will live our lives better so that when we do get to that moment of death, whenever that is, we'll be able to look back and say, I lived my life as fully as I could. And so don't be afraid of it, right? It's okay. It might feel a little sad sometimes, but it's okay. Sadness won't hurt us. We could feel like the sadness and move on. It's okay. So just do it. Just think about it a little bit and it'll change your life.
What a great way to end the interview. Thank you so much, Jill. I honor you. I respect you. I think this is such a valuable journey that you're on. And audience, thank you for being here with us again on another episode of Your Health is Your Greatest Wealth. And if this topic resonated with you, please share the video, please subscribe, and help us just have a better understanding of what we all need to start dealing with. Thank you.
It is really interesting when you said that, like, because we weren't supposed to record today and it just happened that it worked out. And I don't know. I mean, I'm one of those people that I think, Ryan probably was wherever he is, was probably like, all right, you two you gotta do this. You gotta get together this week. I think that our people have that ability from the other side. Personally, wow. I think so. Oof. So, yeah.
Wow. Wow. Yeah. Thank you so much.